HOA Karen tried to steal my ranch, so I turned it into a movement. She couldn't stop. You have 30 days to vacate the ranch, Mr. Durham. My client's son needs it for his wedding gift. That's what the lawyer said. Dead serious. No greeting, no warning. Just a cold voice on the other end of the line telling me to pack up and leave the land my daddy left me. So some spoiled brat could build a McMansion and call it destiny. And that, folks, was the moment I realized this wasn't just a bad joke. This was war. Now, before we dive headfirst into this tale of trespassing, forged documents, HOA tyranny, and a woman so entitled she made Marie Antoinette look like a minimalist, do me a favor. If you've ever dealt with a nightmare neighbor, or you just enjoy watching the HOA queen pins get what's coming to them, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. This is HOA Karen Files, and trust me, this one's going to make your blood boil and your boots itch. You have 30 days to vacate the ranch, Mr. Mitchell. My client's son needs it for his future family. That was the first thing the man said. Not hello, not a how do you do, just a threat, straight and sharp, like a bullet wrapped in legalese. I had just gotten back from feeding the horses, my boots still muddy, hands smelling like hay and iron. I reached for the landline. Yes, I still use one, and that's what greeted me. Come again, I said, gripping the phone tighter. You heard me, he replied, cold and clipped. Karen's son is getting married. They've decided your ranch is the best place for their new life. We expect full cooperation, or we'll pursue legal eviction. Now, I may be old, but my hearing's just fine. I paused, letting the silence settle like dust in the rafters. My ranch, I said slowly, isn't part of any HOA, and I sure as hell didn't agree to hand it over to your client's boy. The man didn't flinch. According to Mrs. Karen, the original deed is being reviewed. She claims your property falls under Ridgewood Association jurisdiction. You'll be hearing from us officially. And just like that, he hung up. I stood there for a second, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a mosquito I couldn't slap away. I didn't move, not until I glanced out the big front window and saw something that boiled my blood faster than a July sun. There she was, Karen, strutting up my gravel driveway like she owned the damn place. Hot pink tracksuit, clipboard in hand, sunglasses bigger than her moral compass, and behind her, two men in suits poking around my barn like it was a foreclosure auction. My jaw clenched so tight I thought I'd break a molar. I dropped the phone onto the couch and stormed out the front door, gravel crunching under my boots like thunder. What the hell do you think you're doing, Karen? I hollered. She turned and gave me that fake smile of hers, the kind that belongs on TV commercials for diet pills that don't work. Oh, Frank, just checking the property for future improvements, she said, syrupy sweet. You'll be out soon enough. Best to make sure everything's ready for Brandon. Brandon, her son, real estate major turned entitled prince, the kind of kid who thinks he deserves land just because he once read a book about it in college. As I stepped off the porch, one of the suited men unrolled a blueprint across the hood of his luxury sedan. Full layout, giant glass house, circular driveway, 3-car garage, infinity pool. They even marked where the oak tree was going to be removed. That oak had been there since my granddad came back from the war. You're trespassing, I growled, my voice gravelly with rage. Karen barely blinked. Instead, she gestured proudly to a shiny new sign stuck in my front yard, like a dagger in the dirt. Future home of Brandon Carter and Madison Quinn. And then, as if this wasn't enough of a circus, a truck I didn't recognize came rolling up the driveway. Loud and confident like it owned the road. Out jumped Brandon himself. Aviator shades, white sneakers, and a grin that made me want to reconsider the laws against throat punching. Frank, he called out like we were fraternity brothers. Appreciate you clearing out for me, man. Madison and I owe you big time. I didn't move. Not one step. He walked up with his hand out like I was supposed to shake it, and in that moment I understood something very clearly. They really believed this was happening. They thought I was going to roll over. My hands clenched. I didn't shake his. I didn't speak. Then Karen snapped her fingers, and the two suited clowns started walking toward my house. That's when instinct kicked in. I sprinted toward the porch, boots thudding hard against the wood. My front door creaked open. I could feel my pulse in my ears. Someone, some stranger, was trying to enter my home like it was theirs. "Back away from my house," I bellowed. The suits froze, startled. One had his hand on the doorknob. He turned to Karen, who just gave a smug little nod, like she was the damn Queen of England giving permission. "You don't own this place," I shouted. "This is illegal." One of them mumbled something about surveying rights. I didn't care. I slammed the door shut and stood in front of it, my boots planted, chest heaving. "You set one foot inside," I said slowly, "and you'll regret it." They paused. Even Karen's Botox didn't hide the surprise on her face. Brandon shrugged. "Don't be difficult, old man. We'll give you a week to move. 2 if you need help boxing things up." I stared at him. He meant it. This wasn't a prank. This was a takeover. "You've got 30 seconds, I said, calm but firm, "to get off my land before I call the sheriff." Karen gasped like I'd slapped her with a Bible. "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. Brandon just laughed and pulled out his phone. "Go ahead, sheriff's in our pocket anyway." That did it. I took out my phone and started dialing. Right there, in front of them. Karen's face twitched. Brandon's grin faltered. The suits shifted like kids caught sneaking out of class. I hadn't even hit call when Karen snapped. "Fine," she barked. "We'll leave, for now. But this isn't over, Frank." She turned like a spoiled teenager, Brandon mumbling something about ungrateful geriatrics. And the whole mess walked back to their cars. I didn't move until the last tire rolled off my driveway. The quiet returned, but it didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the eye of a storm. I sat on the porch steps after they left. The wood creaked beneath me, same as it had since my daddy built that porch with his bare hands in '67. My knees felt weak. Not from fear, no, I've been through worse, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. Karen, HOA Karen, the same woman who once tried to fine our neighbor for having a bird feeder 2 inches too wide. She had just tried to steal my ranch. I always figured I was safe. My property wasn't part of the HOA. The documents were clear. I paid my taxes, kept my fences mended, stayed out of their bake sale politics. Turns out none of that matters when someone decides the rules don't apply to them anymore. I got up, dusted off my jeans, and walked back inside. Locked the front door. Then I walked room to room, checking every window. Twice. I even shut the old wooden shutters my grandfather carved. Back in his day, you didn't wait for trouble to knock. You kept it out with bolt and barrel. It felt ridiculous, like I was preparing for war. But something in my gut said, "You're not being paranoid. You're being smart." Later that night, just as I was about to call it a day, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. The message? "You can't stop us. Brandon deserves that ranch. Prepare to lose everything." That was the moment I realized this wasn't over. It wasn't a bluff. It wasn't a joke. It was a siege. I slept with one eye open that night. My shotgun leaned against the bedpost like an old friend. At sunrise, I drove straight into town. First stop, the county records office. The building was wedged between a shuttered bakery and an abandoned gas station. Inside, the smell was somewhere between burnt coffee and mildew, and the only sign of life was the clerk flipping through a dog-eared magazine like she'd lost a bet with God. "I need property records," I said. "For which address?" she asked, barely looking up. 1886 Ridgewood Lane. She sighed like I'd asked her to build a rocket ship, then slid a clipboard across the counter. "Fill this out." I scribbled fast, tapping my pen the whole time. 10 minutes later, she returned with a thick file. I opened it, my fingers stiff from adrenaline. And there it was. Deed holder, Frank Mitchell. Restrictions, none HOA jurisdiction, not applicable plain as day. My name, my land. No HOA, no shared rights, no asterisks. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't mistaken. I was being railroaded. But just as I let that sense of relief settle over me like a warm blanket, the clerk spoke again. "You're not the first one to ask about this property this week." I looked up. "What do you mean?" She flipped her magazine shut. "Couple days ago, some woman came in. Real fancy, blonde. Smelled like she bathed in a bottle of perfume. Asked about reassigning land deeds within the HOA. I didn't need to ask who. Karen, I guessed. She nodded. Didn't give a last name, but she had that look. That look, entitled, sharp. smiling while she sunk the knife in. I left the office with the file clutched to my chest. But before I could get to my truck, my phone buzzed again. You think a little paperwork will save you? We're already working on Plan B. I floored it on the drive back. Gravel flew. Dust curled behind my truck like smoke from a brush fire. As I turned into my driveway, my stomach twisted. A moving truck was already parked in front of my house, and standing proudly next to it, Brandon, arms crossed, aviators on, grinning like he just won a damn prize fight. Behind him stood Karen, holding a sparkling silver banner that read, "Welcome home, Brandon and Madison." They weren't bluffing. They were actually trying to move in. Boxes were being unloaded, furniture dragged down the ramp. I saw a crib, as if they were already picturing their kids sleeping under my roof. I stepped out of my truck slow, calculated. My boots crunched the dirt with every step. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I asked. Karen turned toward me, beaming like she was unveiling a new car on a game show. "We're moving in, Frank," she said. "It's time. Brandon and Madison need a fresh start. And once you're out of the way, we'll even hang a little plaque in your honor. Former owner of Ridgewood Ranch." Isn't that sweet? Sweet wasn't the word I was thinking. Brandon chuckled. "Don't be bitter, old man. You've had your turn. It's our time now." I pulled the deed from my coat pocket and held it up. "This paper says otherwise." Karen didn't flinch. In fact, she smiled even wider. "You might own the dirt, Frank," she said, voice like poison honey. "But we control the rest. Water rights, road access, power permits. You'll find it very hard to live here once we file the complaints." She took a step closer. "I've got the HOA board drafting the paperwork. Once it's in motion, you'll be fined so hard you'll have to sell just to stay afloat." Brandon nodded along like a bobblehead in a convertible. "You can fight us," he said, "but you're wasting your time and your money." Then he waved toward the movers. "Go ahead, boys. Get the couch in first." That was it. I'd had enough. "You are trespassing," I said. My voice was calm, flat, cold. "Every box you put on this land is another charge. Every step you take toward my porch is another lawsuit." Karen laughed. "You're bluffing." "Big mistake." I pulled out my phone and hit record. "This," I said loudly, turning the camera to their faces, "is video evidence of illegal trespassing, of an attempted hostile takeover, of harassment." Karen blinked. Brandon looked away. One of the movers froze mid-step. Brandon tried to save face. "You're pathetic. No judge is going to listen to some old man with a grudge. We'll just say you offered it to us and forgot." He smirked. That smirk told me everything I needed to know. They weren't going to stop until they broke me. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I turned, walked back to my truck, got in, and locked the doors. Then I called the sheriff. "Sheriff's Department," the voice answered. "This is Frank Mitchell. I have active trespassers at 1886 Ridgewood Lane trying to illegally occupy my home. I need officers dispatched immediately." "Copy that, Mr. Mitchell. Deputies are on their way." I hung up and watched as the movers started dragging a full-sized mattress toward my porch. Not today, I thought. Not on my land. 15 minutes later, 2 sheriff cruisers came tearing down the road, lights flashing, tires spitting up gravel. Karen dropped her banner. Brandon went pale. The movers froze like deer in a rifle scope. I stepped out and waved the deputies over. "Video evidence," I said, handing one of them my phone. Deputy Carter, a man I've known since his rookie days, watched the footage silently. Then he looked up and nodded. He turned toward Karen. "Ma'am, you and your party need to leave this property immediately." Karen's jaw dropped. But this land belongs to my son. He deserves it." "That's not how property law works," Carter said flatly. "You are trespassing. This isn't a negotiation." Brandon looked ready to argue, but one glance at Carter's hand resting near his holster changed his mind. The movers began shoving boxes back into the truck like they were handling hot coals. Karen stomped her foot like a kid denied ice cream. "This isn't fair. This isn't over." Carter didn't budge. "It'll be over when you leave. And if you come back without a court order, you'll spend the night in jail." They left. Tires spinning, banner dragging, dreams deflated. I leaned against my truck, breathing deep for the first time in days. "You good, Frank?" Carter asked, clapping me on the shoulder. For now, I said, but something tells me they're not done. His smile faded. Keep your head up and keep recording everything. After they drove off, I cleaned up the porch, picked up the trash, stared at the crushed ribbon of that ridiculous banner. Then just before sunset, another text came in. You think you won today? Just wait. We're playing the long game. I read it twice, then I deleted it and locked every door in the house. The morning after the sheriff cleared them off my land, things were quiet, too quiet. No texts, no trucks, no Karen waving around legal threats like party favors. The horses down by the stable were grazing peacefully, and for a second I let myself believe it might be over. I should have known better. Around 10 a.m., I heard a knock on the front door. Not a timid knock, not a neighborly, hey there kind of knock. This one rattled the damn frame. I opened the door cautiously, coffee in one hand, shotgun not far from the other. It wasn't Karen. It was a man in a bright orange vest and hard hat holding a clipboard. Morning, he said, not unkindly. Ridgewood Utilities. I've got orders to disconnect your water. I blinked. You what? He flipped through his clipboard. Says here, non-payment of HOA fees, scheduled shutoff. I stared at him like he just told me aliens were landing in the backyard. I'm not part of the HOA, I said. He scratched his chin. You got proof of that? I pulled out my phone and showed him the deed I'd photographed at the county office. No mention of HOA, no shared utilities, nothing. He looked at it, whistled. Huh. Well, you better take it up with the HOA office. Orders are orders. I'll give you until end of day, but if I don't hear back, I've got to shut it off. And with that, he walked back to his truck and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and dread behind him. I didn't waste time. Grabbed my keys, grabbed my deed, and headed for the one place I never thought I'd have to visit again, the Ridgewood HOA building. It looked more like a courthouse than a neighborhood association. Marble floors, shiny glass walls, faux pillars, like someone tried to copy the U.S. Capitol on a subdivision budget. The sign out front read, Ridgewood Estates HOA, protecting your community. Protecting it from what, I wondered? Common sense? Inside, the air was colder than the look the receptionist gave me. Can I help you? She asked, every word soaked in passive aggression. Yeah, I said. You're trying to shut off my water, but I'm not part of your HOA. I want to speak to someone in charge. She tapped her keyboard. Address? 1896 Ridgewood Lane. Her eyes narrowed. It says here your property was annexed into Ridgewood jurisdiction 3 days ago. My stomach dropped. What the hell do you mean, annexed? She handed me a printout. I scanned it. There it was, a forged document, sloppy signature, my name, claiming I voted to join the HOA. Only problem? I didn't. I shoved the paper back at her. This is fake. I never signed anything. She shrugged. Take it up with the board. I didn't wait. I marched straight down the hallway toward the boardroom. I didn't care about policies or protocol. My blood was boiling, and someone was going to hear it. The door was closed, but I could hear voices inside, familiar ones. And once the water shut off, Karen was saying, he won't have a choice. He can't live out there with no water. No one can. Laughter followed. Polite, corporate, cruel. I slammed the door open so hard it bounced against the wall. The room went dead silent. Karen's grin froze. A couple of the board members shifted in their seats like they'd just been caught with their hands in the offering plate. I walked straight to the head of the table and dropped my deed like a gavel. This, I said, voice low and steady, is the only document that matters. One of the older board members, Mr. Jenkins, squinted at it. Karen, he asked, is this true? He's not under our jurisdiction? Karen straightened her blazer and spoke sweet as pie. He's confused. Old age does that. I barked a humorless laugh. You want to test that theory in court? I've got the sheriff on speed dial. I'll press charges for forgery so fast your heels won't have time to click. Karen's face faltered for the first time. A younger woman on the board, Nancy, her name tag said, spoke up. I moved to rescind the annexation. The others agreed. They typed up a reversal, signed it, and I recorded the whole thing on my phone. Karen signed last. Her hand shook the whole time. As I turned to leave, she leaned in and whispered, "You'll regret this." I didn't stop, didn't look back, just said, I already regret ever thinking you'd stay in your own damn lane. Back at the ranch, I called Ridgewood Utilities. The same guy answered. All good, Mr. Mitchell, he said. We just got the reversal notice, no shutoff. Relief hit me like a cold breeze after a long ride in the sun. For the first time in days, I felt like maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind me. But I wasn't naive. Not anymore. That night, I sat on the porch with Duke and Shadow, my two German shepherds staring out over the pasture. The sky was clear, stars blinking like distant campfires. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the next shoe hadn't dropped yet. And sure enough, around 9 p.m., headlights crawled up my driveway. It was Deputy Carter. He stepped out of his cruiser with a manila envelope in his hand and a grim look on his face. Mason, he said, we've got a problem. I didn't say anything, just waited. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a court summons. Karen was suing me. The charges? Emotional distress, harassment, illegal interference with property reassignment. It was laughable, and it was real. Carter sighed. You've got nothing to worry about. Any judge with a brain will throw this out. That's not the point, I said. He looked at me puzzled. She's not trying to win, I said. She's trying to wear me down, run the clock, bleed me dry in court until I give up. He didn't argue, just nodded. And I realized then, I wasn't fighting a person, I was fighting a machine. A broken system greased by money, fueled by entitlement, and weaponized by people like Karen. The court date came quicker than I expected. I wore my best jeans, a clean shirt, and boots my father passed down to me. I walked into that courtroom not as a victim, but as a man defending everything he'd built with his bare hands. Karen and Brandon sat at the plaintiff's table, looking like they were posing for a magazine shoot. Karen in a red dress that screamed desperation. Brandon in a gray suit 2 sizes too tight, flipping through his phone like he was bored by the whole thing. Their lawyer was a short man with thick glasses and a face like wet toast. He launched into his opening like he was auditioning for Broadway. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, my client has endured undue stress, public embarrassment, and the loss of a dream. I zoned out for a moment, focusing instead on the judge. She was sharp-eyed, no nonsense. You could tell she didn't suffer fools, and I prayed she wasn't in Karen's pocket. When it was my turn, I stood slowly. Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice steady, I've lived on that ranch for over 20 years. I've paid every cent I owed, maintained every inch of land. My property is not part of the Ridgewood HOA, and I never agreed to hand it over to anyone. I laid out the evidence, deed records, county maps, HOA documentation, all of it clear as glass. Then I played the videos, Karen trespassing, Brandon mocking me, the moving truck, the banner, the whole damn circus. The courtroom was silent when the last clip ended. Even the lawyer stopped fidgeting with his tie. The judge folded her hands and stared at Karen like she was a roach that had wandered into her kitchen. I've seen enough, she said. Mrs. Carter, your behavior is outrageous. This court finds in favor of the defendant. Case dismissed. My knees almost buckled from the relief. But then she added, Mr. Mitchell, if you wish to file a countersuit for damages, we will hear it. I glanced at Karen. She looked small, tired, like a balloon that had finally run out of hot air. Brandon sat pale and quiet, and in that moment, I didn't feel victory. I felt pity. No, thank you, Your Honor, I said. I just want to go home. I walked out of that courtroom a free man, but freedom doesn't last long when greed's still circling the fence line. When I pulled into my driveway, there was a man sitting on my porch swing. He stood when he saw me. Black suit, glossy shoes, slick hair, a smile with too many teeth. Mr. Mitchell, he said, I'm Trevor Price, real estate development. Karen promised me this property once her son was settled. I stared at him. She was wrong. He nodded slowly. Everyone's got a price. Not me. I'm prepared to offer you $500,000. Cash. I didn't even blink. No deal. He handed me a card. Think it over. Then walked down my steps like he'd just left a business lunch. I stood there, card in hand, watching his SUV disappear down the road. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. For a few days, everything went still. No calls, no trucks, no HOA letters shoved under my door. Just me, the dogs, and the rhythm of the ranch. Boots in the dirt, feed bags on my back, sweat on my brow. But if there's one thing I've learned from years of watching clouds roll in over this land, it's that calm doesn't mean peace. It means pressure's building. And sure enough, one night around midnight, I woke up to Duke and Shadow barking like their tails were on fire. I grabbed my flashlight with one hand, shotgun with the other, and stepped out onto the porch. My light caught movement near the barn. Two figures in dark clothes. One had a gas can. The other, a lighter. I didn't wait. I pumped a shell into the chamber and fired into the air. Boom! The echo bounced off every tree for miles. The two men dropped the can and bolted toward a black pickup parked just past the fence line. I ran after them, yelling, boots pounding against the ground. But they were younger, faster, and gone before I could even read the plates. I stood there panting, the smell of gasoline in the air, the dogs circling my feet. They hadn't lit it. Not yet. But they had planned to. They were going to burn it all. By the time Deputy Carter got there, I had photos of the gas can, tire tracks, even a quick clip from my security camera. Grainy but good enough to show the shadows creeping near the barn. Carter watched the footage and whistled low. "Looks like you've made some powerful enemies," he muttered. "I don't care who they are," I said. "I'm not backing down." He nodded. "Good, because they're not playing nice anymore." He bagged the gas can for prints, then looked me dead in the eye. "Double lock everything, install more cameras, and maybe consider buying more dogs." I took that advice to heart. Next day, I didn't just double down. I fortified. 4 more cameras, steel bars on the barn doors, motion sensors at the gate, and 2 more German Shepherds from a breeder in town. Brothers, both mean-looking, both sharp as broken glass. I named them Tank and Scout. If they wanted war, they'd get it. But even then, I knew they weren't done. A week later, the letter came. Certified mail. From Ridge County. Notice of eminent domain. Trevor Price had convinced the county to declare my ranch essential for public development. Said they needed the land for infrastructure expansion. Said I'd be compensated fairly. It was a lie dressed in legalese. And guess who was listed as the proposed buyer? Trevor Price Enterprises. I drove straight to the county office. Didn't call, didn't write. I walked right in. The director of land management, a man named Hargrove, looked like he hadn't seen daylight or decency in years. "This is theft," I said, slamming the notice on his desk. He adjusted his glasses like I'd interrupted his nap. "Sir, the county has determined Crescent Ranch is the ideal site for future housing. You'll receive market value compensation." I leaned over his desk. "My grandfather built those stables by hand. My father was buried with soil from that pasture in his boots. This isn't some damn patch of dirt you can parcel off like a chessboard?" Hargrove blinked, then smirked. "Prove we're wrong." And right there I understood something clear as glass. They didn't care if they were wrong, because people like them don't lose, unless someone like me makes them. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled out every folder I had, every photo, every video, every document, every dusty newspaper clipping from the local archives. I found an old article about my grandfather, featured in a 1954 piece titled, "Veteran Builds Ranch with Bare Hands After War." I scanned it, added it to the stack. Then I picked up the phone. Not to the sheriff, not to a lawyer, to someone who could really make noise. A reporter, Abby Collins, tougher than a barbed wire fence, young, hungry, the kind of journalist who doesn't take payoffs or pull punches. I laid it all out for her. Karen's stunt with the HOA, the forged documents, the arson attempt, the developer's backroom deals, the fake eminent domain. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she looked me square in the eyes and said, "This is going to make one hell of a story." And 2 days later, it did. Front page of the local news. Veteran rancher battles corrupt developer over land grab. Photos of my land. Footage from the cameras. Even quotes from Carter backing up my side. The story spread like wildfire. Talk radio, social media. Even the state paper picked it up. Suddenly, Ridge County's inbox was flooded. People showed up at town hall with hand-painted signs that read, "Save Crescent Ranch. Stop trespassing developers. We stand with Frank. Trevor Price tried damage control, held a press conference, talked about progress and community vision, but no one was buying it. Too many angry voices, too many cameras, too many voters. The county officials who once ignored me now looked like cats in a room full of rocking chairs. And 1 week later, they caved. The eminent domain order was officially withdrawn. A public apology was issued. Trevor Price lost 3 major contracts worth millions. And Karen? Gone. Packed up and moved out of state. Word was she went to live with a cousin somewhere in Arizona. Brandon, too. They vanished like the smoke they once planned to leave behind my barn. One evening, a beat-up pickup rolled down my driveway. An older man stepped out. Gray beard, worn boots, calloused hands. "You Frank Mitchell?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled and held something out. It was a small bronze medal, faded, etched with the words, "For courage and honor." "My granddad knew your granddad," he said. "Just wanted you to know, some of us still remember what backbone looks like." He tipped his hat and drove off. I stood there for a long time, turning the medal over in my palm. Maybe I didn't win because I fought harder. Maybe I won because I didn't back down when it got dirty. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't just about fences, permits, or paperwork. It was about drawing a line and saying, well, this far, no further. And when folks like Karen come stomping across that line with their lawyers and blueprints, you don't yell, you don't cry, you stand, you fight, you keep your damn ranch. It had been a few weeks since the county backed off. The protest signs were gone. The news crews had packed up their vans and chased the next scandal down the interstate. And me? I was just a tired old rancher trying to breathe again. For the first time in months, the land felt peaceful, the horses were healthy, the air was crisp, and the porch swing didn't groan like it carried the weight of the world anymore. But something had changed inside me. I wasn't the same man who fed horses and fixed fences just to get by. I'd been through a war, the kind they don't give medals for, and I wasn't about to waste that fight. So I sat down, poured myself a cup of black coffee, pulled out a yellow notepad, and wrote 3 words across the top. Build something better. The idea hit me like a bolt from the sky. What if I took everything I'd learned, all the grit, grief, and gut punches, and turned it into something that could help others? Not another ranch, not a protest. Something lasting. A place for folks who've been kicked around by the world, stepped on by red tape, or chewed up by the HOA machine. A place to start over. I'd call it Whitestone Acres, named after the pale stones my grandfather lined the fence with decades ago. Said they kept the snakes out. Said they reminded him of the hills back in Kentucky. I didn't want to build a business. I wanted to build a home. For vets, for young ranchers, for folks like me who still believe that land, sweat, and honor mean something in this country. So I got to work. I cashed that $750,000 check from Madison's father. Still the biggest check I've ever held. Still felt like it might bite me. But I put every dollar into the soil, leveled new ground, built cabins from reclaimed wood, ran fresh water lines, solar panels, wide porches, big sky. No HOA, no developers, no fences unless you needed them. I reached out to folks I trusted. Old friends, farm hands, veterans groups, even a couple of kids from the town high school shop class. And little by little, they came. A young Marine named Tyler who lost a leg in Afghanistan and couldn't sit still in a city apartment. A single mom named Darlene who'd grown up mucking stables and needed work with dignity. An older fella named Jerome who'd spent 30 years driving long haul and just wanted to smell hay again. They didn't come for a paycheck. They came because they wanted peace, purpose, and we built it, together. By the end of the second month, Whitestone Acres didn't look like a dream anymore. It looked like a movement. We had 10 people living on the land, each with a purpose. The cabins were warm, the water ran clean, and every night folks would gather around a fire pit, not to drink or cry, but to share stories, laughter, some pain, mostly healing. We didn't have uniforms, but we had something stronger, respect. And for a while, I thought the devils were finally done with me. But they don't like quiet. They hate rebuilding. And they sure as hell don't like it when folks start helping each other without a cut going back to them. One Monday morning, I got a letter slipped under my gate. No name, no return address, just a short typed message. Your permits are under review. Expect a visit. Wasn't signed by the county, wasn't signed at all. I knew what it meant. Trevor Price wasn't gone. He was regrouping. That Friday, a black SUV pulled up just past the front gate. Two men in button-downs, khakis, and the kind of sunglasses that say, "We've never shoveled a damn thing in our lives," stepped out. I met them halfway down the gravel drive, the dogs at my side, ears perked. "Morning," I said, flat. One of them, taller and slicker, spoke first. "Mr. Mitchell, we're with the Department of Zoning and Agricultural Oversight. We've had some concerns filed about your recent developments." I crossed my arms. "What kind of concerns?" "Unlicensed construction, improper land usage, unauthorized residential expansion." I raised an eyebrow. "This land's zoned agricultural and private. Been that way since my granddad registered it in '52. He smiled like a man holding a folding knife behind his back. "Yes, well, codes evolve. And these cabins, they're technically dwellings. You may require variances, permits, tax reclassification." I took a breath, slow, deliberate. "Y'all got a warrant?" "No, sir," the second one said. "Then get off my land," I said, "and come back with one. Signed in ink." They didn't argue. They knew the game. This wasn't about zoning. It was about pressure, about turning the screws until I folded. But I wasn't that kind of man anymore. The next week we had surprise inspections, noise complaints, even a garbage citation from a bin that didn't exist. It was all noise, all smoke. But the problem with smoke is it chokes the ones who just started breathing again. I saw it in Tyler's eyes. He'd wake up at 3 a.m. and walk the fence line with a flashlight. Jerome barely spoke, just watched the road. Darlene asked if she should send her daughter back to her sisters in Tennessee. And me? I felt rage like I hadn't since the day Karen stepped onto my land. But I wasn't going to let it rot me this time. I had something worth protecting now. Not just for me, for them, for what we were building. So I did the only thing a man in my boots could do. I called the press. Again. Abby Collins didn't even ask what the story was. She just said, "When and where?" 3 days later, she was back on my porch with her cameraman, a clipboard, and that same fire in her eyes. We sat under the shade of the big oak tree where my grandfather used to tell stories. Now it was my turn. I laid it all out. The new attacks, the intimidation, the code enforcement goons who came sniffing without a warrant. The way these people were trying to choke out hope, one citation at a time. And Abby, she didn't flinch. By the next Monday, the new headline read, "County targets rancher again. Retaliation alleged over land victory." Subheadline, "We just wanted peace," says veteran behind Whitestone Acres project. It hit harder than the first story, because this time, it wasn't just about me. It was about them. The people who came here to heal, to grow, to build a new life. And America, real, hard-working America, has a soft spot for the underdog. Especially when the big dogs show their teeth first. The fallout was immediate. Talk radio lit up like wildfire. I got calls from places I'd never heard of. Ranchers, truckers, teachers, widows, and a retired Navy SEAL who said, "You keep standing, I'll keep sending support." Donations started rolling in. Not much, 20 here, 50 there. But it was the messages that meant more. "I lost my home to an HOA. Wish I'd fought like you." This is what community should look like. I don't have land, but if I did, I'd want to protect it like you do. Suddenly, Whitestone Acres wasn't just a place. It was a cause. And that made us dangerous to people like Trevor. A week after the story aired, a man in a charcoal suit showed up at the local diner where I grabbed coffee. Didn't introduce himself. Didn't order anything. Just sat down at my table and said, "How much would it take for you to sell and go quiet?" I didn't even blink. I reached into my wallet, pulled out a photo, a black and white shot of my grandfather, standing in the same field I plowed this morning, shovel in one hand, hat in the other, sweat across his face like a medal. I slid it across the table. That man built this land when bullets were still in his head from the Pacific. I'll be damned if I hand it over to a man who's never earned a blister. The guy left without another word, didn't even take his sunglasses off. But something told me they were running out of moves. The days after that encounter felt different. Not quieter, not calmer, but rooted. Like the land was with me now, not just beneath me. Word about Whitestone Acres kept spreading. A blog post turned into a podcast. A podcast turned into a radio interview. Then a feature on one of those feel-good Friday news segments. The kind where the anchor smiles and says things like, "A rancher with a cause." But behind the headlines, real work was happening. The cabins doubled. The fencing stretched past the old tree line. We built a small stable and named it after Jerome, who passed away quietly in his sleep one night. Boots by the door, coffee cup half full. We held a service under the stars. Tyler played taps on his phone. Darlene baked cinnamon bread and said, "This place saved my soul." And I believed her, because it was saving mine too. One afternoon, I got a call from the governor's office. They'd heard about Whitestone Acres and wanted to send someone out. Not for inspection, the aide assured me, for appreciation. I don't trust suits, but I said yes. And when they came, they brought something unexpected. A grant. A state-backed initiative to support veteran-led land projects. Not much, but enough to install a proper greenhouse, upgrade water lines, and buy a used tractor that didn't rattle like a tambourine. And with that, Whitestone Acres stopped being just a ranch. It became a model. Other towns called, other counties asked. And before long, we were mentoring new groups, helping them draw up plans, avoid HOA traps, understand zoning, and build something real. All because I refused to give up when the wrong people said, "It's over." That fall, I was standing at the edge of the field where the wheat met the fence when Tyler walked up behind me. "Hey, Frank," he said, "mind if I ask you something?" "Shoot." He paused. "You ever think maybe this was all meant to happen?" I didn't answer right away. I watched the wind run through the grass like a hand through old hair. Then I said, "No, I don't believe in fate. I believe in what a man does after he gets knocked on his ass." Tyler nodded. "Still, if it hadn't been for Karen, for Trevor, for the courts," he trailed off. But I knew what he meant. Sometimes the storm clears the air, sometimes the fire reveals what's worth saving, and sometimes the worst people in your life show you the best version of yourself. That night, I sat on the porch with all 4 dogs, the stars bright as gospel above me. I looked out over the cabins, the fences, the gardens, the bunkhouse, and I thought, this is legacy, not what you leave behind, but what you stand for, what you refuse to sell, what you teach others to protect. And if the Karens of the world come knocking again, well, they better bring more than blueprints and bad intentions. Because this time, they're not just facing one old rancher, they're facing all of us. You'd think that after everything, the lawsuits, the sabotage, the firebombed barn, things would finally settle. But peace, I've learned, isn't something you reach. It's something you tend, like a stubborn patch of wild grass. And if you don't pull the weeds early, they take over fast. It started small, a broken tool left out in the rain, a cabin argument over chores, a few snide comments about who was pulling their weight, stuff you'd expect when 10 strangers try to become family. But Whitestone wasn't supposed to be just another commune. It was built on the ashes of survival, a place for second chances. And second chances, they come with scars. I remember the night things came to a head. It was right after dinner. We'd had chili and cornbread, Darlene's specialty, and everyone was full and quiet. Then out of nowhere, Tyler slammed his spoon down. "You gonna keep pretending everything's fine while some of us do all the damn work?" he barked. Silence fell like a hammer. Darlene looked stunned. Jerome's cousin Kenny, who'd just moved in a week ago, stiffened. I put my coffee down slowly. "Something on your mind, son?" I asked. Tyler's jaw worked for a moment. Then he stood. "Yeah, I didn't fight overseas to come back and shovel stalls while people sit around talking about trauma and calling it therapy." No one spoke. Not even the dogs moved. I stood up, walked around the fire pit, stopped beside him. "Didn't fight in the war so you could live in peace either, huh?" He didn't answer. but his fist told me everything. We talked later that night, just me and him, out by the edge of the fence where the wind cuts hard across the ridge. Turns out he'd gotten a letter from the VA, denied benefits. Again. He'd been carrying that rage for days, maybe weeks. And like a lot of us men, especially the stubborn kind, he didn't ask for help. He threw punches with his mouth until someone threw one back. I listened, didn't fix it, didn't try, just stood there with him while it burned out. Sometimes leadership ain't about speeches, it's about not walking away. The next morning I called a meeting under the oak tree. No rules, no speeches, just space. We sat on stumps and folding chairs. Everyone spoke, Darlene, Kenny, even quiet old Vince, the retired electrician who mostly just mumbled and fed chickens. We talked about why we came, what we feared, what we lost, and what we were building here, not just cabins and fences, but trust. By the time we broke for lunch, something had shifted. No fireworks, no applause, just a nod, a handshake, a shared breath, and that was enough. For now. Winter came early that year. The frost settled deep into the ground, and the mornings turned from cool to bitter. But inside the cabins, the stoves burned hot. The pipes didn't freeze, and for once, nobody was packing up to leave. By every measure, we had made it. There were now 16 people living at Whitestone Acres. A waiting list from a nearby vet clinic had started to form. A group from Kentucky wanted to model their own land project after us, and I'd been asked to speak, again, at a conference on rural renewal. They wanted to call me a pioneer. But let me tell you something. When you're on a tractor fixing a busted axle in 29-degree wind, pioneer is just a pretty word for too stubborn to quit. Then came the letter. Registered mail from a place called Civic Horizon Partners. I'd never heard of them. But the logo on the envelope? That I recognized. Trevor Price. Only this time, he wasn't hiding behind county clerks or zoning inspectors. He'd changed tactics. Inside the envelope was a slick folder, heavy paper, gold trim, and a check. $2.3 million for the land. No tricks, no lawsuits, just an offer. I stared at that number for a long time, because I'd never seen anything like it, because I knew what it meant. Not just selling dirt, not just handing over buildings, but letting go of everything. The sweat, the defiance, the soul we built together under the oak and beside the fire. I put the folder in my drawer. Didn't show anyone. Not that day. That night I sat outside with Shadow, my old shepherd, lying at my feet like a sack of bricks. I watched the cabins, soft light in the windows, smoke curling from stovepipes, laughter carrying across the cold. And I asked myself the kind of question men like me don't like asking. How much is peace worth? How much is dignity? And what if someone offered you security, not by taking your land, but buying your dream out from under you? I didn't sleep much that night, because part of me thought, maybe the fight's over. Maybe I'd earned the right to rest. The next day I called a meeting. Everyone showed up, even Vince. I held up the folder, said, "We've been offered a buyout." No gas, no yelling, just silence. Then Darlene raised her hand. "If we sell, what happens to us?" I didn't have an answer. Tyler stood. "I came here to fix more than fences, Frank. You sell this place. You're not selling acres. You're selling what fixed me." I looked around, at the veterans, at the outcasts, at the wanderers, at the people who'd found home here not because we offered them luxury, but because we offered them a chance to stand on their own 2 feet again. And I realized something. Maybe you don't fight for land. Maybe you fight for what land lets you build. I walked over to the fire pit, dropped the offer letter in, and lit a match. Nobody clapped, but every single one of them stayed seated long after the flames went out. A few weeks later, the same black SUV that once brought me threats pulled up again. This time, the man didn't get out, just sat behind the glass watching. I walked up to the driver's side, tapped the window. He rolled it down slowly. "You could have had millions," he said. I nodded. "You could have had a soul," I replied. And then I turned and walked away. The snow came heavy that night, the kind that blankets everything in white and makes the world look pure. I stood at the edge of the fields, breath fogging in the moonlight, and I remembered what my father once told me. A man's worth ain't in his land, Frank. It's in what he refuses to give up, even when the whole damn world says sell. That night, I didn't feel like a rancher, didn't feel like a leader. I just felt right. And when I looked back toward the glow of Whitestone, I saw more than cabins. I saw legacy, not what you leave behind, but who you choose to stand beside and what you refuse to let money define. It had been nearly a year since the first fire, since Karen's pink tracksuit darkened my porch, since the fake blueprints, the forged documents, the lawsuit, the moving truck filled with someone else's future. And yet, on the morning the past came knocking again, I still wasn't ready. It started like any other day. Coffee, feed the dogs, check the well. A quick walk down to the greenhouse to help Darlene transplant some kale. There was a light snow from the night before, the kind that looks like the land was dusted with powdered sugar. The cabins were warm, the fences held, and the peace we'd built at Whitestone Acres stood strong. But then Tyler came jogging up the trail. He never jogs. "Frank," he said out of breath, "you might want to see this." I followed him back to the main gate. There, parked just outside, was a familiar dark sedan. Window down, driver waiting. Not Trevor, not a lawyer, not a developer. It was her, Karen. She didn't look like I remembered. No pearls, no power walk, no clipboard. Just a quiet woman in a gray coat, her hands folded on her lap, her eyes tired. I stood just inside the fence, didn't open the gate. "Frank," she said, her voice barely above the wind. I waited. She took a breath. "I'm not here to take anything. I just wanted to talk." Still, I said nothing. "I've lost everything," she continued. "Daniel moved away. We don't speak. The HOA board kicked me out. Lawsuits, fines. Everything I built, it's gone." A flicker of guilt crept into her voice. Or maybe it was something rarer. Honesty. "What do you want, Karen?" I asked finally. She looked down. "I want to know how you did it." "Did what?" "Held on, when I tried everything to break you." The wind picked up. I stepped closer, hand resting on the old iron gate. "I didn't hold on, Karen. I rebuilt." She looked confused. "Most folks think surviving means digging in and waiting out the storm," I said. "But real strength, real freedom, it comes when you build something after the storm. Something worth living for, not just worth fighting for." Her eyes filled, not crocodile tears this time, real ones. "I didn't know how to stop," she whispered. "It started with rules, then property lines, then power, and suddenly I was someone I didn't even recognize. I didn't pity her, but I did understand her. Because when you've been through hell, you know what it looks like behind someone else's eyes." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said quietly. "Just a minute." I nodded, opened the gate just wide enough for her to step in. We walked slowly past the main garden, past the oak tree where we'd built the benches, where new folks often sat their first night, overwhelmed, nervous, broken. She asked nothing. I offered nothing, but I could feel her shoulders lower as we moved. Less armor, more weight. When we got to the fire pit, she stopped. "Did you ever hate me?" she asked. I didn't lie. I did for a while. She looked up, surprised at my honesty. "But I hated what you represented more than who you were. You were a mirror, Karen, of a system that thought control mattered more than people. And I let that system live rent-free in my head for far too long." She nodded. "I was that system," she said. "And I think I wanted to win so badly I forgot what I was even fighting for." We sat in silence. Just the sound of the wind in the trees and a distant horse whinnying from the pasture. Then she stood. "I should go." "Where will you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere quiet." She pulled a small envelope from her coat pocket. "I sold what little I had left. There's a check in here. Not for you and for the ranch. For whoever needs it most. No strings, no name." She placed it on the bench. Then she turned to leave. I watched her walk down the gravel path, boots crunching softly. She didn't look back. I didn't call out. And that's how it ended. Not with shouting, not with revenge, but with something far rarer in this world. Closure. That spring, we used her check to build 2 more cabins. One now houses a young couple from Ohio. He's a mechanic, she's a trauma nurse. The other? We named it Grace House, because sometimes the best things aren't won or earned. They're offered, quietly, without pride, without expectation, just given. One night in early June, we had a bonfire, biggest we'd ever built. Tyler brought out his guitar, Darlene cooked chili, a local kid sang something from Johnny Cash and forgot half the lyrics, and nobody cared. I sat beside the oak tree, the dogs at my feet, the stars above, and I realized something. This land was no longer mine alone. It belonged to every hand that rebuilt it, to every voice that healed here, to every story that refused to end in bitterness. Whitestone Acres wasn't just survival, it was transformation. It was truth. It was freedom without permission. And if anyone came knocking again, well, they'd better bring something stronger than money. Because now, we were a family. And this ranch, it was home.